Hello, I will talk about the rules of chess. First of all, I will start with the progress of the game. The player with the white tools is the first to play. Each player in turn moves one of the tools in his possession, only one tool, except in the case of the castling. In the case of the castling, you move two tools in one move. You move the king and the rook. This is the small castling. In the big castling, you also move the king and the other rook. So you actually move two pieces, two tools in one move. Okay, this is the only exception that you are allowed to move two tools in one move. And each tool also has its unique way of moving, as I explained in the previous lesson, and so on until a decision is made. The player can move any piece in turn and move it wherever he wants, provided that it doesn't violate the rules for moving the pieces. Also, if a certain player's king is exposed to a threat from an opponent's piece, a situation known as check, yes, for example, in this position, the black bishop on c5 threatens the king on e3, it threatens check. The player must do everything in his power to eliminate this situation. Yes? So the white must move the king to other square, in a square that is not be threatened. If he fails to eliminate the threat, he will lose the game in a state known as checkmate. Okay, I will show you an example of checkmate. So actually this is a position of checkmate. Why? Because the black bishop threatens a check on the white king, and the white can do nothing in order to protect his king from a checkmate, because he cannot eat the pawn by the king, because the pawn is protected by pawn f4. And he also cannot move to the square e4, because in this square he also threatened by the black bishop. So actually the black did a checkmate or mate to the white side and won the game. The king also cannot take the pawn f3, because the pawn is protected by pawn e5. So the white king cannot escape the threat of check by the black bishop. So this position is a check position, and the white side lost the game. Any move that doesn't result in this immediately will be illegal. So when your opponent threatens a check on your king, you must eliminate the check, and any move that doesn't result in eliminating the check is illegal. In addition to this, any move that would immediately result in the player's king being in a check is also illegal. For example, in this position, the black threatens check by the black bishop on c6. So the white is not allowed to move the king to square e3. Why? Because in e3 he will be threatened by the other bishop that is on b6. So to move the king from f3 to e3 is an illegal move, because in this square the king is also attacked by the other bishop. Okay? The king is the only piece that must not be deliberately placed under threat by another piece. So this is an illegal move, but the white king can move to f4, because in the square f4 he is not attacked by the black's tool. Okay? Now I will explain the rules of beating. If one of the opponent's pieces stands in the way of the moving piece, he can eat it, provided it is a legal move. Okay, I'll explain what I mean. As I already explained to you, the bishop moves diagonally. So the pawn g2 is on the way of the black bishop that is on c6. So the black can eat that bishop like this. And in chess, unlike in checkers, for example, eating is a right and not an obligation. By eating another tool, it means removing it from the board and placing the eating tool in its place. Yes, so we move the black bishop to square g2 and we remove the white pawn that was on g2 from the board. Okay, I will give you another example. In this position, the black can eat the pawn c2 by moving the knight to c2. So, because of the fact that the knight can move to c2, if on c2 you have the opponent's tool, he can eat that tool. Okay? The same thing, I will give you another example. The black rook can eat the pawn on c3. Why? Because the black rook can move to c3, it can move straight. And if in the way of his movement there is an opponent's tool, then he can eat that tool. Okay? This is a legal move, but it is not a good move. Why? Because after the rook eats the pawn on h3, then the white can eat the white pawn on g2 can eat that rook. So it is not a good move, but it is a legal move. The king cannot be beaten. It is customary to declare in a situation where the king is exposed to a threat and cannot be defended for checkmate. Some shorten it to mate. Okay, all tools eat according to their movement. For example, the bishop will only eat on its diagonal, except for the pawn which moves forward but eats diagonally. Okay, so the pawn is the only tool that it not eats by the way it moves. It moves forward, but it eats diagonally. So the pawn moves forward. That is how the pawn moves. But if it is the black terrain, it can eat that pawn diagonally. And if it is the white terrain, the white can eat the black pawn diagonally. Okay, so the pawn is the only tool that doesn't eat like the way that it moves. It moves forward and it moves forward and it eats diagonally. A special case of beating is beating through its movement, or en passant rule. I've already explained to you the en passant rule. I will explain it again, and later I will explain it in detail. Briefly, I can tell that en passant rule is in a case that the black pawn moves 2 steps forward and only 2 steps forward, then the black has the right to eat this pawn like that. Okay? The same rule is for the white. If the black pawn moves 2 squares forward, then the white has the right to eat that pawn like this. Okay, I will explain in detail the en passant rule later. Okay, now I will talk about the stages of the game. The first stage of the game is the opening. At this stage, the player develops his tools, which are blocked behind the row of pawns. Yes, the tools of the black and the white are blocked by row of pawns. Okay? In order, each side develops its tools in order to allow them to control the center of the board and threaten the opponent's defense. The opening phase also includes the evacuation of one of the sides in order to allow the castling. Yes, you usually evacuate the knight and the bishop in order to do the castling. Then you can do the small castling, or you must evacuate the queen, the bishop and the knight in order to do the big castling. And then you can do the big castling. The castling is a move that aims to fortify the king in a corner and keep him away from the exposed center. A typical opening usually involves a double jump with the king's or queen's pawn. So a typical opening is when you move with the pawn that's before the king 2 squares, or when you move 2 squares with the pawn that's before the queen 2 squares. Okay, so the white can move 2 squares forward with the pawn before the king. The black side can do the same thing. Taking out 1 or 2 knights, then the white can take out his knight. The black also can take the knight in the other side, outside, and then the bishop. Then castling. Then the white can do the small castling. The black can take out his knight. Then the white can move his pawn 1 step forward, and then the black also can do the castling, the small castling. There are openings called gambits in which one of the sides sacrifice material, usually pawn, in order to take control of the center. So there is an opening that called Queen's Gambit. In that opening, the white actually starts to move his pawn that before the king 2 squares forward, and then the black reacts in the same way, and then the white moves pawn c2 to c3. Actually, the white sacrifice his pawn in order to gain control of the center of the board. So if the black takes that pawn, then the white can do e2 to e4, and in that way the white actually control the center of the board. So the white sacrifice pawn in order to gain control in the center of the board. Why? Because in this position the white pawns on e4 controls the square f5. He can move to e5, also he controls the square or threatens the square d5. What I mean by threaten the square e5, I mean that if the black will move pawn f7 to f5, then the white can eat that pawn. And if the white, for example, moves pawn c7 to c5, the white can eat this pawn. But in order if the black wants to avoid from the white side to gain control of the center of the board, then it can avoid taking the pawn, and it can continue to start to he can continue to develop his tools like that. So in this position the white doesn't have control on the center of the board. Okay, so if the black takes this pawn, then you call the opening queen's gambit accepted. Why? Because the black accepts the sacrifice of the white pawns. The black accepted the sacrifice of the white pawn. Okay? The number of openings is large, and the number of variants is even larger. Professional players memorize many openings in order not to make mistakes at the beginning of the game which will give an early advantage to the opponent. The second phase is the middle game. Took place after most of the tools had already been developed and the battle is at its most intense in the center of the board. Usually while exchanging tools and trying to break the other side's pawn's alignment. At this stage, it is possible to implement a large number of tactics to accumulate a material and positional advantage. So there is a lot of tactics in the middle game that I will not talk about them in this lecture. Okay, the third stage is the end game, and this stage happens when a large number of tools exchanges have been made without a decisive advantage being gained for any side. This stage usually includes a small number of pieces for each side. For example, a king, a knight or bishop or rook, and number of pawns. And in which the players try to overwhelm each other, usually by crowning one of the pawns to a heavy piece, such a queen. At that point, the threat in checkmate to the king is small, and therefore the king becomes an active tool, protecting the pawns and supporting their progress towards the 8th row. Because the endgame requires a precise play, many players carefully study common endgame positions. Okay, now I will talk about special moves and situations in the game. I will start with the en passant rule. Okay, or beating through its movement. Pawn can hit another pawn through its course only when the opponent's pawn and not another tool moves 2 squares forward in one move, and in its movement passes the square threatened by pawn. So only if the white pawn moves 2 squares forward, then the black has the right to hit this pawn like that. Or the white also can move his d2 pawn 2 squares forward, and then the black has the right to hit this pawn like this, like this. Okay. the same thing applies for the white. If the black moves 2 squares forward, then the white has the right to eat this pawn like this, or if the black moves is f7 pawn 2 squares forward, then the white has the right to eat this pawn like this. Okay? So the eat is made as if the opponent's pawn has advanced by only 1 square. So when the black moves his pawn 2 squares, you consider it as he moved this pawn only 1 square forward, and you take it like this. Okay? The en passant rule is only valid immediately after the opponent's move and cannot be used afterwards. So, if the black moves his pawn 2 squares forward, then the white can eat this pawn immediately according to en passant rule. But if the white does another move like h2 to h4, then he lost his right to eat this pawn according to en passant rule, because the en passant rule is valid immediately. Only when one of the sides moves his pawn 2 squares forward, and beside to this pawn you have your pawn, you have the right to eat the pawn that advanced 2 squares forward. You have the right to eat it by your pawn, but you can do it immediately after he moved his pawn 2 squares forward. You are not allowed to do it if you did another move. You cannot do it after 2 or 3 moves after he did the 2 square move with his pawn. So the rule is valid, the rule of en passant is valid only immediately after your opponent moved his pawn 2 squares forward. You have the right to eat that pawn with your pawn according to en passant rule. It is valid immediately and not after you did another move. Okay? So we finished to talk about the en passant rule. Now I will talk about the castling. the small castling on the king side, and the long castling, this is the long castling, is on the queen side. In the game of chess, the castling is a joint move of the king and the rook that is considered as one move and is carried out in two stages. Okay? The first stage is the king moves 2 squares towards the rook, and the second stage is that the rook is moved 1 square after its king. This is the small castling, and the big castling is the same thing. The first stage is that the king moves 2 squares towards the rook, and the second stage is that the rook moves before the king. So there are five conditions that must be met in order to do the castling. Okay, 5 conditions must be made in order to do the castling. The first condition is that the king and the rook didn't move at all from the start, from their starting squares. So if you moved the king to e2 and then you came back to e1, in this situation you lost the right to do castling. You are not allowed to do castling at all. You are not allowed to do the small castling, and you are not allowed to do the big castling also. Why? Because you moved your king, and if you move your king, you are not allowed to do castling at all. And if you move your rook on h1 to h4 and then you take your rook back to h1, then you lose your right to do the small castling. Why? Because you moved your rook. And the same rule is for the other rook. If you move your rook and then you take it back to a1, you are not allowed to do the big castling. So whenever you move one of the rook, you are not, whenever you move one of the rooks, you are not allowed to do the castling with the rook that you have moved. So if you want to do castling, you must not move your rook or your king. This is the first condition that must be made in order to do the castling. The first condition that must be met in order to do castling is that the king is not in a chess threat at the moment the king is not in a chess threat at that moment. So, for example, in this position, the king is in a check threat by the black bishop on g3. So, in check position, you are not allowed to do castling at all. Not the small castling and no the big castling. Whenever your king is in a threat of check, you are not allowed to do castling at all. That is the second condition that must be met in order to do the castling. The first condition that must be made in order to do the castling is that the king will not be found in the threat of chess at the end of the castling. So, for example, in this condition, the white is not allowed to do the small castling. Why? Because if he does the small castling, he will be in a threat position by the black bishop after the castling. So he's not allowed to do the small castling, but he can do the big castling. Okay? The fourth condition that must be met in order to do the castling is that the king doesn't move past the square threatened by the opponent's piece. So in this position, the white is not allowed to do the small castling. Why? Because in order to do the castling, he must pass a square f1 that is under threat of the black bishop. So he is not allowed to do the small castling. But he can do the big castling. In this position, the white is not allowed to do the big castling because he will pass through a square that is threatened by the black bishop. Square d1 is is threatened by the black bishop, so the white is not allowed to do the big castling. Okay, and the fifth condition that you must meet in order to do the castling is that there are no tools that separate the king from the rook. In this position, the white is not allowed to do the small castling. Why? Because there is a white bishop that separates between the rook and the king, so small castling is not allowed, but you can do the big castling. And in this position, you are not allowed to do castling at all, because there is a knight that separates between the rook and the king. So you cannot do castling at all. The white cannot do castling at all. So that is the fifth condition that must be met in order to do castling. A distinction is made between the small castling, which is the castling beside the king. This is the small castling, and this is the big castling that I have already explained you. If only one of the rooks has been moved, it is possible for the other rook to be used for castling. So if you only moved the rook h1 here and then it comes back to h1, you are not allowed to do the small castling because you moved the rook, but you can do the big castling because you haven't moved the rook on a1. If the square adjacent to the rook is threatened, it is not possible to make a small castling. So I already explained to you the rook, the square g1 is threatened by the black bishop, so you are not allowed to do the small castling, but you are not allowed to do the big castling also, because after you do the big castling, your king will be threatened in check by the black bishop. So in this position you are not allowed to do castling at all. Even if the rook itself is threatened and the conditions mentioned above are met, it is allowed to castle. So in this position, as you can see, the white rook on h1 is threatened by the black bishop. But even though the rook is threatened, you can do the small castling. Yes? So you can do castling even if your rook is threatened before the castling. But you cannot do the big castling because your king will have to pass across a square that is threatened by the black's bishop. D1 is threatened by the black's bishop, so you are not allowed to do the big castling. According to the rules of the game, to make a castling, the king must be moved first, and then the rook must be moved. So first of all, you take the queen 2 steps towards the rook, and then you take the rook before the king. The same thing is about the big castling. First of all, you take the king 2 steps towards the rook, and then you take the rook before the king, like this. Taking the rook before moving the king means a move where only the rook moves. So if you touch the rook at first, you are not allowed to do castling in this particular move, because you have to move the rook to any square that is legal square. You are not allowed to do castling, because in order to do castling, you first of all must touch the king and move it, and after that you touch the rook. If you touch the rook at the first, then you are not allowed to do the castling at all. If you touch the rook a1, you are not allowed to do the big castling, because first you must touch the king and move it, and only after that you touch the rook and move it in castling, if you want to do the castling. The castling is an important move in the early stages of the game, because it serves two important purposes. First of all, it moves the king to a more protected place than the center of the board where the battle started. If you do a small castling, you move the king from the center to more protected place. And the second aim for the castling is it takes the rook out of the corner and into a better attacking position in the center of the board. So if you do the small castling, the rook moved from the outermost square to a square that is more close to the center. The same thing is for the big castling. You move the king to a protected position, and you also move the rook to a center of the board. He actually controls the D column that is the center of the board. Okay, the castling is the last move added to chess rules, and it appears in the book of the French author Claude Gouget in 1560. Okay, now I will talk about the decision. Okay, what is check? Check refers to the situation where one of the players attack his opponent's king. Okay, in this position the black threatens check on the white king. That is, the king stands in a situation where in the next move he will be taken if no action is taken. So theoretically, if in this position, if the white made an illegal move like this, then theoretically the king can be taken by the black bishop. It is only theoretically to explain you what is the meaning of check position. If in a check position, if the white side is not taking any move to eliminate the check, the king can be taken by the threatening piece that threatens check. Okay? In a check position, the attacked king's side must cause the check position to stop in any possible way. So you must eliminate the check. In this position, the white must eliminate the check by the black bishop. The threat of check, the white must eliminate the threat of check by the black bishop, whether by eating the attacking piece. So in this position, the white king cannot eat the attacking piece. Actually, in this position, actually the white can eat the attacking piece. You can eat the attacking piece by the rook. Okay, this is the first option. Or the other option, the second option, by blocking the path of the attack. In this position, the white can block the path of the attack of the black bishop. How he can move? He can move his pawn from f2 to f3, and in this way actually he blocked the line of the attack. The line is the diagonal from h1 to a8. So the white blocks the line of the attack, the path of the attack. Okay, that is the second option that the white has when he is under check threat. And the last option, the third option that the white has when he is under the threat of check is to move the king. Okay, so he can move the king to a square that is not being attacked. But it must not be moved to the square that is being attacked. Okay? Explain you what I mean by this. So this is a check position. The white bishop is threatening check on the black bishop is threatening check on the white king. The king is not allowed to go here. Why? Because he's threatened by the other bishop. Or it's not such a good example because I have two bishops in the same color. That is impossible in check. But in this position, as I have told you, the black bishop threatens check on the white king. So the white is not allowed to go to h3, but why? Because on h3 is threatened by the black bishop that is on h8. Okay, so this move is an illegal move. If none of these actions are possible, the situation is called checkmate. So checkmate is a situation in which the king cannot defend himself at all. So there is three conditions that must be met in order to perform, in order to do checkmate. The first condition is that there is a threat to the king. If there is not threat to the king, there is no threat to the king, then it is not a checkmate. It must be threat on the king. If it is a position, I thought I'll show you an example. In this position, if it is white's terrain, then this position is called stalemate, or it is a draw position. Why? Because there is no threat to the white king. When there is no threat to the white king and the white king has no square to go, cannot go to any square. This situation is called a stalemate, or this position is a draw position. Why? Because if it is white's terrain, he cannot go to square e1 because he will be threatened by the pawn d2, and he also cannot go to square c1 for the same reason. He will be threatened by the pawn d2. He cannot go to square e2. In this position he will be threatened by the black king, and the same thing is about square c2. Cannot go here because he will be threatened by the black king. So this is a stalemate, and it is a draw. So that is the reason that there is a threat to the king. The first condition that must be made in order to do the checkmate is that there is a threat of check to the king. In this position, because of the fact that there is no threat to the king, there is no check from the black to the white king, it is a stalemate and it is a draw. So there must be a threat to the king in order to do the checkmate. This is the first condition that must be made in order to do the checkmate. The second condition that must be made is the king cannot escape to any place that is not under threat. For example, in this position, condition 2 is not met, because condition 2 is met. The king cannot escape to any place that is not under threat. The king cannot escape to g3 because he will be under the threat of pawn h4. He cannot go to square f3 because in f3 will be under the threat of the pawn e4, and he also cannot go to square e2 because in the square e2 he will be under the threat of the pawn d3. Okay, so the second condition that must be met is that the king cannot escape to any place that is not under threat, like this position, for example. And the third condition that must be met in order to do checkmate is that there is no tool that can protect the king. So if we look on the same position, in this position condition number 3 is met. Why? Because there is no tool that can protect the king. There is a threat by the black bishop, threat of check, and the bishop cannot protect the check. The bishop cannot protect the check threat. The knight cannot protect the threat of check, and the rook also cannot protect the threat of check, and also the pawn g2 cannot protect the threat of check. So this is, you can see that in this position all three conditions of the checkmate is met, and that is the reason that this position, that is a checkmate position, and in this position actually the black won the game. The black did a checkmate to the white. Okay, whoever managed to checkmate won the game. Also, there are several rules that regulate the matter of check. The player must not make a move so that his king is threatened by check. Okay, I have already showed you the rule, but I will repeat on that rule. In this position, for example, the king must not go to square d1. This is an illegal move. Why? Because actually the king went to a square that is threatened by the black bishop. So this move is an illegal move. Also, second example, this position, the king is not allowed to go to d1 because he's threatened by the black rook, and from the same reason is not allowed to go to square d2. Okay, so when you are in a check position, you must cause the check position to stop if possible. Any other move in a check position is illegal. So in this position that is a check position, the black rook threatens a check on the white king. The white must eliminate the check position immediately. The white must stop the check. If the opposing player is not paying attention to the check and makes an illegal move, for example, if in this position the white makes an illegal move like g2 to g4, his king must not be hit and his attention must be drawn to the fact that he is threatened by the check. The illegal move is cancelled, so you must take back the illegal move, and the white must eliminate the check. He can move to this square, or he has another option to block the line of the attack like that. Any other move in a check position is illegal. Okay, the illegal move is cancelled and he must make another move in his place, like the move that I showed you. Okay, now I talk about 4 types of check. The first type of check is a direct check. Moving a piece so that it threatens the opponent's king by itself is called a direct check. So in this position, if it is black's turn, he can move his pawn from b6 to a5 and threat a check to the white king. So the black moves his bishop, and with his bishop he threatens a check to the white king. So when you move your tool and with that particular tool you fret a check on your opponent's king, you actually make a direct check. Also, in this position, if it is black's turn, the black can move his rook from a8 to a1 and threat check on the white's king. So the black moved his rook, and with his rook he threatens the check on the white's king. So that is a direct check. When you move your tool, and with your tool that you moved, you threaten a check on your opponent's king, you make a direct check. The third example of direct check is in this position. If it is black's turn, he can move his knight, and he can by this threat a check on the white king. This is a direct check. It is no so good move, because then the white can eat the knight, but it is an example for direct check. The black moved his knight, and with his knight he threatens check on the white king. So that is the first type of check, direct check. The second type of check is the indirect check. Moving a piece so that it opens a line of attack for the piece standing behind it to face the opposing king is called indirect check. So I'll show you an example for indirect check. In this position, if it is white's turn and he moves his knight from a7 to c6, he makes a direct and indirect check to the white king. Why? Because the black rook threatens check on the white king. So by moving the knight, he creates a check by the rook. So he moved one piece and threatens a check by another piece. Okay, so this is the indirect check. So in indirect check, the tool that you move is not threatening check on your opponent's king, but the other tool that is behind the tool that you moved is threatening the check. So this is the indirect check. Another example of indirect check can be if it is black's turn, he can move his pawn from f4 to f3, and by moving that pawn, he actually threatens check with his bishop on g5. Okay? So you move one tool and you expose the king to a check by another tool. This is the indirect check. Okay? The third type of check is the combination of indirect check and direct check in one move, and it is called the double check. Moving a piece so that it itself threatens the opponent's king and at the same time opens a line of attack against the opponent's king for the piece standing behind it. That is a combination of direct check and indirect check in one move, and it is called double check. Okay, I will give you an example of double check. In this position, if it is white's turn, he can move his bishop from d7 to a4 and make a double check. Why it is double check? Because he threatens check by the tool that he moved. He moved the bishop, and the bishop threatens check on the white king, and he also, so this is direct check, and he also created indirect check because he exposed the king. By moving the bishop, he exposed the king to indirect check by the black rook. So it is a combination of direct check by the bishop and indirect check by the black rook. So this is the double check. I will give you another example of direct check. In this position, if it is black's turn, he can move his knight from d4 to b3 and create double check on the white's king. Why? Because he moved his knight, and the knight threatens a direct check from b3 on the king, and he also created indirect check by the black rook on d8. Okay, so a double check is exactly what it sounds like. A king is put in check by two pieces with a single move. Okay, double check almost always occurs with a discovered check or discovered attack. When one piece moves and exposes a new attack by a previously blocked piece. So when the black moves with his knight to b3, he makes a direct check, and also he makes an exposed check. Or discovered check. So when he moves his knight here, he makes a direct check by his knight, and he also makes indirect check or discovered check by the black rook. Okay, so double check is the third type of check, and the last and fourth type of check that I will explain you is the indirect check, is the cross check. Cross check is when a player responds when a player responds to a king threat with counter check while blocking his opponent's check. Okay, so the fourth type of check is cross check. When you are under the threat of check, you move your king and escape from the check threat from one side, and from the other side, by moving the king, you yourself make a counter check to the opponent's king. I will give you an example for that. So in this position, the black threatens a check on the white king, and if white moves his king to the square d1, he actually escapes from the check of the rook from one side, and from the other side he threatens counter check with his bishop to the black king. So he escaped from a check, and he threatens a check on the black king. That is a counter check. Okay, thank you very much.